Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Holly Starkey, fantasy story editor. I edit all subgenres of fantasy. So in today's video, I want to talk a little bit about developmental editing and the process that I go through and maybe how best to work with a developmental editor for your story. So I first like to say that when I am working with a client, I do ask them quite a few questions up front because I really want to give them the best experience possible, make sure that, they're spending a lot of money on developmental editing, and I want to make sure everything goes as best as it can. So I do ask, for instance, when they hand me the story, I say, what's the genre, subgenre, and tell me about your target audience. So when it comes to the target audience, I like to know like the age group they're targeting, or targeting men or women, or both. What kind of stories have the audience already read before? So those things are important for an author to know beforehand because it's really going to determine how you're going to write the story and some changes you want to make. That's all very important because you want to make sure your story is, of course, going to fit in with other stories that your audience is going to love, but also make it a little different. And it's helpful to have read stories that your audience probably have already read before. It kind of gives you an idea of what your audience likes, what they expect from a story. How can you deliver something that's different to help you stand out, but not so different that the people who like that type of story don't like your story. So that's what I want to know. So it kind of gives me an idea as an editor where the author thinks the story is going and what they want the story to do. So I also like to ask, what is the goal of this story? Meaning, do you want to do self-publishing, traditional publishing? Because I think that's important. Do you plan to, to do your own marketing? Do you need this to be a very commercial type of story? Because it's going to really determine how I look at the story. So it kind of gets me an idea of what the author wants for this story. Because developmental editing, of course, you can do that without knowing any of that information, but I like to tailor my edits to the client and also, of course, with their story. And I never change the voice of the story. So if I think something doesn't work, I will tell why I think this doesn't work and what changes that the author can make to improve it. But I don't seek to rewrite the story, change the heart of the story, remove the author's voice. A good developmental editor can make changes to the story, or I'm sorry, not make, but suggest changes to the story without actually removing the heart of the story or even changing the author's voice. And so when you're writing your story, think about what you want from this story. I think that is so important to know before you even get really far down the road with hiring an editor and commissioning a cover artist, because you want to know why you're doing this. Are you doing this for commercial success? And if you are, there is nothing wrong with that. We all need to make a living. Are you doing it to win some kind of literary award? Or are you doing it just for yourself? This is a story that you plan to put on your own bookshelf and make available to just your family and friends. So how commercially viable it is doesn't really matter. And if that's any of those reasons, they're fine, but you have to really know why you're doing this so that at the end of the journey, you're not disappointed. And as an editor, I've asked people these questions and they've answered that sometimes they don't know. And I think that's totally fine that you don't know, but I do like to tell clients, these are something you may want to start thinking about. Where do you want to go with this story? What do you want from it? If you don't care if it doesn't make money, that's fine. But if you do secretly care, you know that it makes money, but you wrote something that's not really that in the commercial area, it'll be harder to make money from it. But you still can, because you just never know. Someone might say, oh, this is not going to be a commercially successful story, but then you publish it and it might sell 1 million copies. You just never know. But also, if your goal is commercial success, it's easier if you just prepare yourself before you start writing to write stories that can fit in commercially successful genres. That's what I'm trying to say. So those are just some of the things that I look at when I'm looking at a story. And also, when you hire a developmental editor, I think it's always good to ask for an example of how they developmental edit. So I cannot, of course, provide manuscripts from previous clients because it's a huge violation of the author's privacy. But what I do is sometimes I show the end notes. So I make, for developmental edit, I make comments at the end of every chapter, like 1 to 3 paragraphs at the end of every chapter. And then I make some overall comments at the end of chapters, and I do inline comments. Overall comments at the very end of the story, as well as comments 1 to 3 paragraphs per chapter at the end of each chapter. And I also do inline comments, so I can't really show someone an example of inline comments because then I would have to show them the actual manuscript, and I can't do that. But I do show examples of, at the very end of the story, what I would have typed up. I also can show examples of, at the end of chapters, what I would have typed, what I actually did type. But I would just change, like for instance, I would change the character names if I mentioned character names, and I would change the, if I mentioned the title of the story, I change that. And some other details about the story, I changed it. Some things I just have to completely like black out and make a comment saying, due to privacy reasons, I can't show you what this line actually said. Because I take privacy very seriously with authors, because a lot of authors have handed me stories. They've worked on them for years. They say, you know, I don't want my family to know that I'm writing this kind of story. And I just would never violate someone's privacy. But I think it is possible to show a client what your developmental edits look like without violating privacy. So that's what I like to do. I know some people suggest you ask for recommendations. I think recommendations are good, but a lot of times if someone's never worked with an editor, any kind of edits they get, they think are amazing and they love it. And so I think it's always better, I think it's best to just see an example, some sort of example of how the developmental edits look like. So most editors do, for developmental edit, at least in my experience, most of them do the chapter by chapter breakdown and do the overall notes at the end, and they do the inline comments. But every editor is not, of course, going to be the same. Some may not even do it that way. So it's a good idea to kind of see an example of how the editor speaks to the author. And also, if you're asking for recommendations, I would ask, was this author friendly? Was this editor friendly? Was he or she easy to get in touch with? Did they build you up, or did they tear you down? Because yes, the goal for editing is to tear the story apart in a good way to make it better, but you don't want to actually tear the writer down. You don't want to crush someone, make them feel like crap, make them feel like their story is crap, and it's like you're a terrible writer. And some editors kind of have that. I don't think they do it on purpose, but I think it's also part of their personality. They're not very, I don't want to say they're not nice, but they don't do a lot. Their customer service skills aren't the best. Let's just say that. Some of their customer service skills are not the best. For me, I think someone can have a book that needs a lot of work, and there's still something in that book that is amazing. Something that you can tell the author that you loved, and that you can praise, and you can give the author suggestions on how to improve other parts of the story. And not just suggestions, you have to tell someone why something isn't working. And then of course it's up to them to decide if they agree with you. But just saying, oh, this doesn't work and that doesn't work, and this won't be commercially successful, or this is not gonna win any kind of literary award. Those kind of like big blanket statements aren't helpful for a writer. You have to tell them why you think, and of course at the end of the day it is an opinion, why you think this scene doesn't work, or this character isn't coming through as like fully fleshed out on the page, why you need to add a scene, remove a scene, add a character, remove a character. I mean, you have to give reasons why an author should make changes, because I think editing is about learning process for the writer. Every time they have a manuscript edited, they should come back a stronger writer. And how are you ever gonna get stronger if you don't know the reason why? So that's why I think when people come to me and they wanna know about, has anyone ever worked with me? Of course, I can give them some information for people who I have worked with, clients. But I also would you like to see a sample of a developmental edit? I have to say, of course, some of it's gonna be redacted because it is edit on someone else's work, and there are privacy issues, and I can't show you the inline comments because I would have to show you their manuscript. So that is something I think you should ask for. when you're trying to work with a developmental editor. And I also want to say one more thing. Just because a developmental editor charges a lot of money doesn't mean that they are going to be the one for you. And just because they don't charge a lot of money, maybe because they're the cheapest, also doesn't mean they're the one for you. It's not always about cost. I mean, I do think to an extent you get what you pay for, but there are other factors to consider. Some editors charge less because maybe their living situation allows them to charge less for clients, so they're able to pass that savings on to their clients. Or they live in an area where the cost of living is lower. Some editors maybe live in a very expensive area, so they need to charge more, or they've worked with best-selling authors and they feel they can charge more, but it doesn't mean that they're necessarily a better editor. Look at the examples they give you of developmental editing and judge from that. You can ask for recommendations and ask how this editor worked with you. Were they uplifting? Were they kind? Did they help inspire you to be a better writer? Those are things that I would look for when hiring a developmental editor. Again, my name is Holly Starkey, Fantasy Story Editor. I hope you found this video helpful. I just wanted to talk about how I work with clients in the beginning before I get their manuscript and some things that I ask for. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I am working on another video where I'm going to show you how I edit something inline comments, but I'm going to use my own work because I can't show you someone else's work. So my name is Holly Starkey, Fantasy Story Editor, and I make new videos daily, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.